Here to break it all down with us is MSNBC contributor and president and CEO of Voto Latino, Maria Teresa Kumar, and former Republican congressman and author of The Social Contract on Substack, Joe Walsh. Maria, how much do you think former President Barack Obama is needed on the campaign trail in this moment?
One of the things that we were just discussing it when he was off camera is the fact that he is such an incredible communicator that he is able to synthesize really difficult, complex issues to places where people can actually understand. So real, short little conversation, snippets. But I think what's most important is that when they see Barack Obama, people remember a time in America where there was unity. They remember a time when there was calm, when they saw that there was actual opportunity for their families. And the contrast between the hate that the Republicans on the MAGA side keep pushing and someone who is very calm and collected and saying, look, this is where we are in America, but we don't have to be. Remember when I was president? And I think that that's one of the reasons why you're seeing him on the campaign trail. I can tell you that in 2024, it took him such a long time to go out on the campaign trail on behalf of Kamala Harris. He was reticent. He wasn't sure if he was the right voice. And I think people are realizing, actually, no, we want to go back to policy, not to politics where we're being divisive. Well, and I think that's what makes him effective.
With, quite frankly, an MIA Joe Biden. I mean, who is the person that's going to step in that chasm?
I think, well, that's one of the things. Barack Obama doesn't want to have to do this, right?
He doesn't.
Like he has
introverted.
Yeah,
it's hard to believe it.
He retired. You know, he did his 8 years. He was ready to move on and pop up, for presidentials, do whatever. With the five presidents get together, do that thing, do some movies. But there's the need, and for him and his team, it's about the democracy. And I want to play something for you, Joe, as a new Democrat. You are one of the leaders of your party. Something he said about being the hope and change guy and how that's tweaked a little bit lately.
A lot of people have asked me lately whether I'm surprised by the direction the country's taken. And even though I am the hope and change guy, I try to be honest with them. So I say yes. There are things I am worried about. I'm worried about how willing Republicans in Congress have been to surrender their role as members of a co-equal branch of government, refusing to buck the president even when they know he's out of line, even when a lot of them will privately admit that power is being abused in ways that will hurt their constituents and hurt the country.
He went on to talk about the Supreme Court, the universities and law firms that have capitulated over and over and over again. Is this the right message as for the closing message? Because there's also obviously there's the affordability aspect of things. It feels like in Norfolk, Virginia, this is the thing that folks want to hear.
Anger.
Yeah.
I look, and that's Barack Obama's so good at what he does. Democratic voters are freaking pissed off.
And scared.
And my biggest criticism of my new political party is that the party, the leaders, the establishment are not meeting this moment. But Democratic voters have been. In every special election since Trump was sworn in, Democratic turnout has been through the roof. They're pissed off. And I think Obama, to the best that he can, touched on that. But the anger is beyond Obama.
Well, and I think one of the things that is curious about this, too, is that he's doing it in Virginia, where the brunt of federal layoffs are felt.
Right.
And so that's where the anger is. Like, I actually, as a federal worker, now have to go and stand in food line instead of jumping on the metro to go to work.
Well, let's talk more about Virginia, but also New Jersey and where President Obama was. It wasn't just that he was in Virginia. He was in Norfolk, which has a very large veteran population, but also African-American population. That's how you pronounce it. And
I looked at Jackie like,
watching yesterday.
and then after Virginia, President Obama went to Newark, New Jersey, the state's largest city, my birth city, that also has a very large African-American population. Should we take a signal from that, MTK, that not only is the president campaigning in these two pivotal states with gubernatorial races, but it's also about bringing out the base. And let's not forget, the base of the Democratic Party is the African American vote and African American women in particular.
Well, and I think one of the reasons he also went to Newark is absolutely the African-American community. And it's also a reminder of what the Trump administration was doing under ICE. Remember, that is where you had the congresswoman basically saying, getting arrested and now has all these trumped up charges. And it's a reminder of what happens when you have a hostile federal government in your backyard, when even your public officials that are elected fairly can't do anything about it. So I think it's absolutely about the base, but it's also a reminder, it's a contrast of this is chaos under the Republican administration. It will continue if you do not have Democrats being there for
And we should point out that Congresswoman LaMonica McIver is going to be on the show later on in one of our hours.
Yeah, and just quickly, I mean, Trump, with what he's doing with ICE, he's declared war on brown and black people in this country.
Yeah.
White progressives, man, they're coming out, they're voting. But Obama needs to remind these black and brown voters of what this current president is doing on our streets.
Do they need reminding, MTK? Because we're seeing...
This is going to sound really absurd to all of us because we're in the news daily and constantly, but I can tell you that I've had conversations even with some folks in Texas, and what they're receiving on their feed is completely different than what we're receiving. And it was one of those epiphanies that one of the things that the Democrats have to figure out what to do is how do you get into these non-traditional media platforms where the algorithm, which I always remind people someone made, is preventing people from absorbing and getting the news that they actually need to have agency when it comes to vote.
And that's the thing. I think it's different. It's not that he needs to remind them, Joe. I think that what he needs to remind them is, and what other leaders of the party should be reminding voters about, is their agency, to empower them to go beyond the fear that they're feeling.
That's exactly right.
When you're talking about New Jersey, one of the things that we saw with Trump was the Latino vote, right? You saw a large share of the Latino vote in New Jersey go his way. As you've been talking to folks, as your team's been talking to folks in New Jersey, how are they kind of taking in what has happened over the last 10 months, the Latinos in New Jersey, and are they going to take it out on Trump on Tuesday?
There is so much fear in New Jersey. And it really depends on what pockets you're in. You know, sometimes you talk to folks and they're like, well, you know, I just get up every day and I go to work and everything will be fine. But that's a coping mechanism. Because at the same time, what we're seeing is that they're not going to church. They're not buying as they do. And one of the phenomena that we're seeing, depending on where he's deployed these individuals, people are actually changing how they behave in their work. So they'll actually start working after hours in order to prevent any tragedy happening. I do think that one of the things that I keep saying is that we're going to see on Tuesday is a silent majority. Oftentimes, a silent majority is related to the right. In this case, it's so many people in the Democratic base and independent voters saying this is actually not what we want in our streets. And it is an opportunity for the Latino community to have a come to Jesus moment of saying, was it the economy? Or is this how you actually want to militarize your livelihood every single day? Because it is absolutely dangerous. And it doesn't matter if you are undocumented or not. The amount of Latinos that I know walking every day with their passports should really be a wake-up call to everybody that we could be the beginning of the canary of the coal mines, but we're not the only ones if we don't show up.
Maria, there's two things you said that I want to dig a little bit deeper into, the algorithm and also this anger culture that is so prevalent in our society right now. And I wonder, when I'm looking at the Democratic Party and the standouts right now, it's Zohran Mamdani, right, who I would say has been more optimistic than anger. But when we're looking across our entertainment and, again, the landscape of our current culture, the things that seem to break through the most are these debates, these television shows where people are constantly arguing with each other, people having outbursts that go viral on TikTok and Instagram. I mean, is tapping into the anger culture actually what Democrats need to do to move the ball forward for the party? Or is that wrong?
I'm biased. I'll say yes.
I'll say no.
Oh, he's a new Democrat. He's a new Democrat.
I think righteous anger is going to carry the day against righteous anger against what Trump is doing. Look, the beautiful thing...
Is that how you would characterize Mamdani's tone or approach?
Oh,
with
I think
this
he's,
anger?
yeah, I think he's tapped into that
Just
as
anger
well.
said in a nice, positive,
nice-
fun way.
It may
But
not
no,
be
but no,
him
but
saying
no, but
it,
he's
him
saying-
doing it, him tapping into it.
No, but what makes him unique, though, is that yes, he has this. We could say deep frustration. There could be anger, but he also has a policy. He also has policies that whether or not you're aligned with them, that they're actually fixing people's, economy, their state of being, and
Addressing the anger.
and addressing the end of saying, like, you
Right.
could be angry. Yes, but there's also inequality, and this is how we're going to fix it. And I think this is where the Democrats are really challenged. It's not enough to say that you are going to go and vote on Tuesday against the Republican establishment. You actually have to give them something to vote for.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think Abigail's been doing that. Proposition 50 also does that for Governor Newsom. And I do think that the Democrats can't rely on this idea that people are going to be so angry they're going to turn out. You know what? They're going to tune out if they're going to be so angry. You
I
have
think,
to give them
and I think
policies
the
to go
Democratic
forward.
voters are way so far ahead of the party right now.
I don't
it's the
disagree.
one great thing about Trump. He's so bad. He's like forcing us right now in real time to decide what kind of country we want to be.
Silver lining.
Period.
Yes.